Well, it was yet another bad election for Republicans. As you know, big setbacks all around. In the Virginia State House, where Democrats now control both branches. Kentucky, it seems like, is almost a solidly blue state after a strong Republican challenger was easily defeated. And of course, the big one, the crushing defeat in the red state of Ohio, where the amendment enshrining abortion rights was not even close. So, what in the world is happening, friends? Well, we want to offer some analysis here that is simply not being heard in most Republican circles because they don't want to talk about this topic. Now, one of my colleagues dropped a tweet into our internal conversation we were having the morning after the election, trying to figure out just how bad things were, and it resonated with everyone. The author of that tweet is our guest today, Joseph Backholm, senior fellow at the Family Research Council. But before we talk to Joseph, I want to put up his tweet so you can read it. And Joseph says, people don't like abortion, but they vote for it anyway. Why? Because they view it as happiness insurance. The sexual revolution has convinced the world it's impossible to be happy if you're not having sex. So abortion is necessary because pregnancy inevitably results if you're having lots of sex. Of course, hookup culture makes people miserable, which makes it somewhat ironic that babies die and the adults are miserable anyway, but that's the way it is. Sadly, not having sex is seen as more unthinkable than killing your baby. Until we destroy the lie that sex equals happiness, people will continue to see abortion as a necessary evil. Wow, that just knocked me out. So I want to bring Joseph in right now to talk about this. Joseph, why did you think it was necessary to say what you just said?
Well, thanks for having me, Jim, and thanks for facilitating what I do think is an important conversation. And
Yep.
those of us who have been part of this movement and this effort and just kind of observing the culture for a long time. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the first time I had this thought, but somewhat recently, in my experience, it just occurred to me that we might be kind of just missing the target, so to speak, that abortion is really a symptom and it is not the disease. And we've been treating it like a disease. And we have been trying to convince the world that abortion is wrong. And the fact is that the data shows we've won that argument. Most Americans believe abortion is wrong. But in the meantime, the abortion industry has tried to convince the world that abortion is essential, even if it is wrong, as a way of protecting our happiness, as kind of an emergency hatch, a break glass in case of emergency concept. And I think they've been successful in doing that. So in some ways, we've both won our respective arguments. We've convinced the world that abortion is not good. There's very few people who think abortion is a wonderful thing. They'll all just kind of they couch it in how hard and how difficult and how personal it is and all of those things. That's kind of an acknowledgement of the moral dubiousness of the decision. But while we've won that, we still have people who like it because of this idea that happiness comes through sex. Happiness is the most important thing in the world. Therefore, we need sex. Therefore, we need our contingency plan. And that's what abortion functions as.
Well, right, Joseph. And the thing that I think makes a lot of Republicans, conservatives uncomfortable about this is that look at the exit polling, which you also posted on that tweet, that demonstrates 82% of the demographic 18 to 29 voted in support of this in Ohio. Now, we both know, Joseph, that includes Republicans.
Right. No, that's exactly right. I mean, and there's other data that shows that it's something like 39% of Republicans vote in support of abortion. So there's a lot of voters. It's not a majority, but a lot of voters who will vote for Republican candidates, but vote for abortion as an issue when given the chance. And that begs a lot of questions about kind of how formed or not well formed our worldview is, how coherent it is, how consistent it is, and why we vote the way we do. But you're right. This idea that Republicans are anti-abortion and Democrats are pro-abortion is not true. Most Democrats, of course, are pro-abortion, but that does not make the supermajority of Republicans people who have convictions about life as a matter of principle. It's often just kind of, and we see it talked about right now with the attempt to draw a line at 15 weeks, which is itself is kind of an incoherent line. The reason we propose 15 weeks is because we think it feels reasonable. And maybe that's something the public will accept. It is this idea that we're going to now defend just kind of a partial genocide. I mean, there's no logical reason to draw that line at 15 weeks other than we think it can sell politically. And we're in this strange place where we're going to say, okay, you just kill those kids if that's what we think we can win an election with. We are not a culture that is seeking coherence and logical consistency. Yep. Or a culture that is generally governed and run by the way something makes us feel. And we're seeing that all over the abortion debate.
And Joseph, we always talk about like what we want to hear the politicians say. And thank you, by the way, for roasting Chris Christie for his horrible answer in the Republican debate. Gosh, that was really hard watching everybody straddling the fence there. I thought DeSantis kind of did okay, but let's talk about, let's not blame the politicians for this, which I think is kind of what you're getting at here. If we have weak worldviews to begin with, then there's going to be cracks. We see the exact same thing happening with moral compromise on LGBT. That right now is like, I work in Washington a lot. I see it with, just go to CPAC. I mean, you see it all over the place now. So we're seeing a compromise at every stretch. So the question is, how do we get it back? And also, what role does the church play in all of this, Joseph?
Yeah. Well, and let me see if I can connect those dots between the abortion issue and the LGBT issues. If I can for a second, then I'll answer your second question. Is it really is, it's about my body, my choice, which is a slogan we hear in the abortion context. But really, it's this claim that my life is an accident. I belong to myself. I get to determine for myself what is right and wrong, that my body exists to make me happy. That's the theme. Those are the assumptions that undergird the pro-abortion assumption, that the purpose of my body is happiness. That's also the premise that undergirds everything in the sexual revolution, whether it's same-sex marriage, or the gender issue of I can identify as whatever I want. Once you accept the premise that my life is without any ultimate purpose, that I belong to myself, that I determine what is right and wrong for myself, and that the purpose of my life is happiness, my body, my choice. That's the theme. Therefore, I should be able to change my gender. I should be able to marry whoever I want. I should be able to sleep with whoever I want. And so the abortion and the LGBT issues feel different, and they're framed in the political context as different, but they're coming from exactly the same place. Yep. It's my body. It's my choice. I can do what I want because I'm in charge of myself. And that's also why those positions are inconsistent with a biblical worldview, because we recognize we do not belong to ourselves. We were created with a purpose, for a purpose, by somebody who knows our purpose and knows what's best for us. And we actually find our happiness in submitting to the will of the one who created us, because we're the creature, not the creator. So those issues are very, very combined. And so that leads into kind of your second point there about how does the church respond to that? And I think the failure that we've had in the church broadly is not discipling around these issues, is we treat them like political issues when really they're much more fundamental than that. They're answers to the question of, who do I belong to? Who determines what is right and wrong? Where did I come from? What happens to me when I die? And that should be in the sweet spot of what the church is spending its time talking about, that you were created with a purpose, for a purpose, by someone who loves you and knows what's best for you. And when you submit to that, you will find joy, peace, belonging, all the things that you're looking for, which necessarily means that you cannot be pro-abortion. You cannot believe you create your own gender. You cannot sleep with whoever you want to just because you want to. But that's the result of laying a foundation built on things that are true. And because so many people in the church, it's north of 30% of Christians in Ohio voted for issue 1. Because they do not have a well-formed worldview. They identify as Christians in the same way they think you identify as male or female. I can be whatever I want to be, and I'm going to define that concept for myself, and everybody else is expected to acknowledge that. We've just entered this world where no term has any actual meaning.
Right, and that it's loving to be tolerant and to show mercy when we see people who are really heading over a cliff. It's like, no, we don't feel like that we can judge people, and you know, gosh, we see it everywhere, and there's another another thing that has really bothered me in recent years, and you actually touched on it in another tweet, which I think is symptomatic of this as well. You called out Bud Light, who justifiably has been, paying the cost for their endorsing transgenderism. But then Bud Light decided, you know what, we're going to change our image, and now we're going to sponsor women's MMA. Now, Joseph, is there anything that dehumanizes women more than women in a cage beating each other to a pulp, which is exactly what happens in MMA, than that? And by the way, just thank you for calling Christians out on that.
Well, yeah, that commentary on kind of on Bud Light is this idea, oh, we've lost the concern, we've lost the heartland, we've lost the Bible Belt, we've lost middle America because we decided to hire this transgender influencer to sell our Bud Light. Therefore, we'll respond to that by let's sponsor MMA, which is just this overt violence where women are beating each other in the face, and they'll love that. That just to me is so tone deaf in misunderstanding who middle America is. No, we don't believe men can become women, but we're not all excited about the fact that women can beat each other in the face and be violent. So I don't know why that's seen as a reasonable response to try to win back that market. That just to me is more tone deafness from kind of the corporate elite in America about the market that they are serving. And I mean, though I am, in fairness, not in the Bud Light market anyway, but what they perceive middle America to be interested in. So I just think they're completely out of touch. And both the initial decision and the response to the initial decision as an attempt to repair the damage just continue to kind of demonstrate their lack of understanding of how people feel about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman.
Right. And I'll just go out there and say, Joseph, I don't think Christians ought to be watching MMA. I mean, I kind of went down that road a few years ago. I got caught up in it, and I thought, well, it's kind of like boxing. But, I mean, you're talking about a sport where they take each other to the ground and literally beat their heads against the canvas. I mean, this is barbarism, and I just don't think that Christians should be supporting it.
Well, I basically agree with you. I've had a very strong visceral reaction to it ever since it became a thing. I've never watched a round of MMA. I've seen highlights of it, and I frankly avert my eyes in the gym because sometimes they are like putting it up on a screen and I can't necessarily avoid it. But Christians are not supposed to love violence. I think it's a half a step short of the gladiator days where we are just celebrating violence for its own sake. So yeah, there's nothing. I mean, and I know people who are genuinely Christians who have a different perspective on this, but to me, it's glorifying violence and the desecration of the image of God that exists in each one of us. And a little violence incidental to other kind of sports, I'm fine with, but not for its own sake. It happens and people run into each other and there's wrestling, and I love football and violent things happen in that game every once in a while. Yes. But that's not the purpose of it. And so I think like celebrating violence for its own sake, that just does not resonate with my spirit well at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could probably do a whole show on MMA because I just got to the point where I found like it was doing something to me that I didn't like, when I found myself like really looking forward to watching this and standing up and cheering when I saw, somebody being taken down and beaten like that. It was just like, whoa, it just felt dirty. It felt sinful to me. So I think I've dealt with it on my own terms. But Joseph, where do you think that the pastors, the denominations are hearing what you're saying? I mean, because to me, this is really, we have got to be dealing with with people's hearts and their minds on this issue. And that 18 to 29 demographic, man, if we don't turn it around soon, I mean, they are going to be lost forever. So do you have a sense that people that there's an understanding that we need to get this right?
You know, in some cases, yes, you know, and with respect to that 18 to 29 demo, you know, Winston Churchill, I think, is the one who said, if you're not a progressive by 20, you don't have a heart. And if you're not a conservative by 40, you don't have a brain, right? So we know that that's not going to remain static. And every generation becomes more conservative as they get older, you know, conservative in the broadest sense, not necessarily politically, but in terms of the things they value in life. Because having kids and paying taxes and living in the real world just has a sobering effect on you, where on some level you're pulled back to reality. So that's not going to remain that way forever, because, you know, young people are often governed by their hearts. But you're right. The discipleship component of this is really important. People have to understand why certain things are true. Young people who are just, you know, aggressively pursuing hookup culture and the values of the sexual revolution and self-identification need to understand why it's making them miserable. Because the same generation you cite, their voting habits on things like abortion and their beliefs about things like gender and marriage, they have whole hog absorbed the values, and they are also the most miserable generation that has ever been tracked since we've been asking the question. Their mental health is terrible. They are overly suicidal. They are overly depressed. All of these things are a function of the things that they have decided are true. No generation has pursued happiness with more vigor than they have. And wouldn't you know it, they are the most miserable generation that we've ever had. Those things are related. From a Christian worldview, we understand that the reason they're miserable despite their pursuit of happiness is because we were not created to please ourselves. We were created to please the one who created us. And in doing so, find our own joy in our peace. You make known to me the paths of life. In his presence is fullness of joy. At his right hand are pleasures evermore. That's the end of Psalm 16. And that's what the biblical worldview reveals to us. He makes known to us the path of life. And in that, we find pleasure evermore. What Satan comes in and says, in satisfying yourself, you find pleasure evermore. And Gen Z, like no other generation before, knows that's not true. But what they don't understand is why it's not true. And that's the opportunity that the church has. We should be able to explain to them, we know you have good intentions. Here's why all of your pursuits of joy are not producing joy. Let me give you a better alternative. And truly, the harvest is plentiful right now. We just don't have enough laborers who understand what the harvest is dealing with and why it's not working.
Well, Joseph, thank you. Thank you for saying what you just said, because, you know, just as you're speaking, I'm listening to you, and just my heart is rejoicing when I'm hearing you saying this, because I know it's true. I know we all have an innate desire for transcendence. You know, we are going to worship something, and I just know my own testimony. And so many testimonies. I mean, I have been amongst people who once identified as transgender and gay and lesbian and all of that, and have found a saving relationship in Jesus Christ. And that is what gave them salvation. And as you say, that's what gave them meaning and happiness in their lives. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, because that's what they were created for. And that's the disconnect is there's a lot of people who believe they don't have any ultimate purpose, that there is no ultimate purpose to be found. So the best we can hope for is happiness, and our feelings will guide us to happiness. And it's a logical conclusion if that's the reality we live in, but that's not the reality we live in. So there's a better way we get to show.
And it's such a dead end. So Joseph, where can our viewers find you and read your work and Yeah, tell
Tell
us.
us, you know.
Well, I mean, you found me on Twitter at Joseph Backholm. I mean, it's X now, whatever we're calling it, but at Joseph Backholm. I also am a senior fellow at the Center for Biblical Worldview, the Family Research Council, and that's frc.org/worldview. I have content there. I also write for World Opinions, WNG.org. World Magazine, and I'm a contributor to World Opinions, and actually have an article in there today, kind of on the same subject that we're talking about. So those are some of the places where you'll find my content.
Yeah, well, I'll just go ahead and say your Twitter account should be mandatory reading for everybody who calls themselves a Christian or a conservative. I appreciate the work you're doing, brother. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know you've got other appointments, so I really appreciate you squeezing us in, Joseph.
My pleasure. Thanks for your time.
God bless you.